he's on his way to go fishing. So to come and change for the boat. So very quickly, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Great that we got everybody's introductions in. I'm just going to quickly do some housekeeping. So thank you, Sita. Just popped her contact information into the chat box. So make sure that you do that so that anybody who is looking to reach out to you can. And we're going to be talking this morning about critical thinking skills. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody about our regular calls. So obviously, you guys know our Monday morning hustle. Next week, we will not be here. Thursday of this week, though, we do have Catherine coming for our Tech Talk. Catherine, what's Tech Talk about this week?
It's part 2 of our schedulers. So last week was the free ones and the limited,
functionality.
I wasn't thinking. Limited usage of them, right? But this week these will be more robust and much nicer. And I've been playing with one that I really, really like. So I think you guys will have fun.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. And I'm not sure if we have details on a Wednesday night jam session, Ivan, or are we pushing that off?
No, Wednesday's on. And in fact, because Stephen has just joined, Stephen is actually going to be co-host, for the next few weeks anyway, to see how he acclimatizes. But Stephen brings a wealth of knowledge in a number of areas. And last week's discussion on gold, that was a pretty cool one. So this week's expanded to being gold and silver and other precious metals as an investment. So don't miss it if you are interested in that type of thing.
Very cool. Okay. And I believe that's it. We don't have an outright networking event booked just yet, I think, for next month. But Ivan, do you want to really quickly just share about the upcoming social media program that you're going to be running?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a four-weeker. And so I'm definitely going to be the one presenting the very first presentation, which is on know your audience, your online audience, and where they are, where they hang out, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook, etc. And then there are 3 others in the first month that will cover the entire range of how to be effective online and social media and paid advertising on social media.
Awesome. Wow, sounds fantastic. Okay, very cool. All right, so this morning, what I wanted to talk about was critical thinking skills, and that's something that came up a couple weeks ago. And I thought, in all the decision making that everybody's doing for their businesses, there's some really key things that I can share with you and help develop some skills around, and also just some general awareness about, what you might want to be looking at a little differently and how to look at that differently. Two guys, I'm trying to think who the other one is. Elon Musk is one. Who's the other one? The other one is, I think it might have been Bill Gates. Yeah, that were just recently talking about how those critical thinking skills really impact their ability to be successful. It's the one thing that they really feel is the largest key to their success. And, when guys like that are saying critical thinking skills are one of their most important skills, I think we should probably pay attention. So I thought we'd start off, first of all, by recognizing what critical thinking truly is. And my notes are beside me, so I'll have to refer to them a couple of times. But I really looked at a bunch of definitions of critical thinking skills and looked at it in this space of, as business owners, what are we trying to do? And it really comes down to our ability to objectively consider and challenge. So it's not just consider, it's also consider and challenge in a way that's factual, rational, and unbiased to seek the best possible outcomes. And there's some pieces about this that I think are really important to uncover, and we're going to do that, and then we're going to talk about what the skill set actually looks like and how to apply those. So I first want to talk about, I'm actually, if I can do this, I'm going to share this on my screen really quickly because I thought this was incredibly valuable. Hang on, I just want to make this big so you guys can see it. So, oops. This is, this was a great little thing that I happened to see. Excuse me. What does the absence of critical thinking look like? And I thought this was really interesting. And I don't want this to sound like, you know, we're beating up on people by any stretch of the imagination, but it truly makes us recognize the intensity of impact that lack of critical thinking can have. So blindly reproducing damaging reactions we've already learned. When we don't stop and evaluate and look at all possibilities, we often are just reproducing, as it says, or we're continuing to perpetuate the same behaviors and reactions. We blindly accept at face value all justifications, I don't know if you can actually see that, given by organizations and politicians and anybody in authority, which of course there's a danger to that. And I know we have lots of conversations around this in our weekly sessions. So I don't want to get dragged down into that. But by the same token, we want to make sure that we are conscious that organizations, no matter where they are on what spectrum, whether it's political or social or environmental, there is the ability for them to put message out there that if we don't critically think, you know, we watch something, we go, oh my God, I can't believe that's true, and look at that, and then you repeat that information, and we go back to that damaging reactions, and now that's been fed by an organization. TV commercials, you know, you see a TV commercial and we tend to have this belief that if it's out there in the media, it must be true. If it's on Facebook, it must be true. Blindly trusting political commercials. And again, I copied this, so this isn't my statements, but it is very true. We blindly believe whatever we hear. Accepting and say that if a textbook says so, it must be so. Also the case, just because it's a textbook doesn't mean anything. That if an organization does it, it must be right. And I'm not a believer of let's unearth the organizations that we have already existing within the world. Don't get me wrong, because that's not what I want to, so I'm going to stop sharing that. That's not what I want to put out there. What I simply want is for people to be able to recognize that you can be swayed by something that's said unless you're conscious. So there's three problems that I kind of wanted to specifically address, and perception, assumption, and emotion are the ones that are usually have the highest influence over our ability. They're the barriers that I would call them to actually critical thinking. And there are a few others. But I think these ones are really the keys. So first of all, perception. So perception is really how we receive information, how we translate that experience. And it can be influenced by many things, but anybody had one of those days where you get up in the morning and things don't go right. You know, it doesn't matter what it is. You know, it could be, you know, 5 little things in a row. And by the time you get to the 6th thing, you're like, you have got to be kidding me. And what kind of a mood are you in? What kind of an attitude do you have about the day, the rest of that day? And I have a little trick for me. You know, by the time about the 2nd or 3rd thing happens, you know, I'm saying to myself, okay, all right, apparently I need to take a moment and have a conversation with the universe. Something's out of balance. I need to figure that out. But without that consciousness, we can very quickly slip into this space where our mood, our attitude, our, you know, just sort of general emotion about the day is negative. And I will tell you that that immediately impacts how you're perceiving everything. By the same token, what if you've had the most amazing day? I mean, everything has gone right. You nailed the big client, a big payment came in, you won the lottery, the house closed, you got a brand new car, all the kids got A's, whatever it is. And then one little thing happens. How likely are you to get bent out of shape about that little thing? But if that one little thing happened after the 6 other little things that were going wrong, do you see the difference? And that's what perception is. It's where you are, that snapshot in time. So we have to be really super conscious of where we are in that snapshot in time, because emotion is actually how we store memory. So I know the guys are going to laugh about this one, but you know, the sort of old interpretation of women never forget anything, because many women are intensely emotional and we store memory with emotion. So if we're PO'd at you guys, we're going to store that memory. But the same holds true for men. It's not just women. It's actually true for men. So the more angry you are about something, how much more in detail do you remember something? Oh, you don't forget a detail, right? So we have to be aware of the fact that how we perceive is highly influenced by where we are in our mood and our attitude in the day. Assumptions are another challenge. Oh, hi, Teresa. Assumptions are another challenge, another barrier to critical thinking skills. And assumptions are really an implied or an unconscious thought that's based in a comfort with what we think we know, right? So we think we know. I'll give you an example. So this is, you know, sort of a silly example, but this is the first one that came to mind. So this morning we're sitting out on the deck having our morning coffee, and we've been here for a couple of days, and there's a hummingbird feeder that sits right off the deck. So we're sitting, and 5 feet from me is the hummingbird who comes into the feeder, and we're watching him, and you know, we're starting to pick out his patterns. And so his pattern has been that, you know, he stops in the tree that's just a few feet off from the feeder, and he keeps an eye on things for a while, and then he gets onto the feeder. And when he flies away, he flies over to the lilac bush and around the backside of the cottage, and then he comes back and we hear him buzz around the lilac. So you can see the pattern of behavior. So at some point I made a comment to Dusty about something he did that was out of that pattern. And I go, well, that's weird. He doesn't usually do that. And then I chuckled and said, we've been here 2 days, but I've already decided that he usually does that. So we have to be conscious of what we've accepted as information, and we've become comfortable with it. Because once we're comfortable with it, we're less likely to want to change. Why? Because our brain has a process where it collects information to confirm our bias. It's called confirmation bias. And it keeps collecting that information, and it says, no, I was right. This is what I thought. I was right. I'm now settled with this belief. I'm good with this belief. I now believe that this is how this hummingbird is supposed to exist. He's broken the pattern. Something's wrong, even though that was ridiculous. So be aware that our assumptions are simply the fact that you've experienced something and you've settled with a comfort that that's what you expect it to be, okay? And the third one is emotion. Emotion can wreak havoc. It can be wonderful, it can be horrible, it can be everything in between, but I want you to understand something. Emotion is simply a biochemical reaction that's intended to either move you on a spectrum of attachment or avoidance. Period. Think about it. Our emotions are simply signals, nothing more than that. We might believe they are, but they're not. They're signals that our body creates that tells us this is good or this is bad. And there's this massive spectrum in between of this is a little bit good and a little bit bad, so we kind of fit right about here. Or this is really good, but there's a little bit of bad, so we're a little more over here. That's all emotions are. But now we go back to perception and assumption, and those things influence how we read that emotion. Inside of each emotion is a message. It's like your fortune cookie. Snap it open. You got to read the fortune to see what it actually means. So often we just assume we know what's inside that.
And it happens so quickly too. I was just going to say, Sherri, that it happens so like this, like.
Yes, and there's, I will have to look it up. In fact, I'll try and remember to post it if I can later today. There's a quote by a gentleman, and I know I'm not going to be able to say it exactly the way it is, but it's along the lines of, you know, emotional intelligence is really the capacity to recognize that there is space in between the emotion and the reaction. And that space, the size of that space dictates how much emotional intelligence we have. So if there's no space between your emotion and your reaction, there's no emotional intelligence. If there's a big space, then you have a stronger emotional intelligence. We want the bigger space. We want time to think about all of these things, our perceptions, assumptions, and to evaluate what that emotion means before we react. And
like I think
to do.
Like a 5-second rule. Before you want to react, take a pause.
Yeah, and it's hard to be conscious of that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much I'm teaching people emotional intelligence. There's no easy way to say that you can always ensure that it's there. It's not one thing you learn and that's it, you're set. It's something that you have to practice every single day. So you can see why it can be very difficult to develop the skills around critical thinking. Okay. What we're going to talk about now is actually those skills. And what I want to do is I want to give you guys an opportunity. So I've kind of filled your brain with all sorts of stuff now. But what I want to do is I want to give you guys an opportunity to try and think about how you would apply these skills. So we don't want to get into, you know, we don't want to get into debates about a decision you've made that's right or wrong, or which way you should go. But what we do want is we want to recognize where that might help. So one of the skills around critical thinking is in being able to see patterns. So I'll give you an example. I was recently talking to a leader of an organization, and we were talking about one of the other leaders in the organization. And there were a number of experiences that had happened with this particular, next level down. That was a funny word, leader. And they all sort of had this consistent theme through them. One of them by themselves wasn't really an issue. It was the sum of them together. So it was the seeing of the pattern. So I'll kind of give you an example of what that's like. So the first one was that this leader had sat down with the, so we're going to say one was a regional leader and another one was like a district leader underneath. So the regional leader sat down with this district leader and said, okay, so there's a bit of a challenge with your communication happening with some of the team. And nobody's really saying you're doing anything wrong exactly. There's just something is not right. And this turned into an 1.5 hour long conversation to which the regional leader walked away and was like, okay, well, I relayed the message, made their notes. I relayed the message, spoke about what the issues were. I'm kind of not sure where it went after that. I didn't really get okay, I understand, I can accept, here's what I'm going to do differently. But we did have a good conversation. It was an 1.5 hour long. So this had happened prior. Then there was the staff member that came and specifically complained and said, I had an issue. I went to this district leader. I spoke to them about the problem. It wasn't the district leader, it was somebody else. And I kind of felt like that nothing I said mattered, that this person was just kind of, trying to make it all better. And it didn't really get resolved. And so then the next thing was that there was a conflict between this district leader and another district leader. And the other district leader said, how do you argue with this? This is what this person said. I can't even argue with that. It's not sensible. And it was a very emotional reaction. So I've now seen the story of these 3 things, and I'm listening to it, and I'm recognizing that in this pattern of behavior, this person doesn't know how to drill down to the issues. There's this constant talking around things, but they won't actually deal with the problem. And so they have the ability to completely deflect every conversation because nothing ever had resolution. There was no definitive answers out of anything. And this poor regional leader was like, I don't even know what to do with this. So you can see that a pattern of behavior started to develop, but until there was that ability to step back and recognize that there's no definition, there's no specific answer, there's no resolution, there's no clarity in any of those, it was impossible to start to approach that situation. So when you're looking for patterns, you're looking to see not at one incidence, you're looking at the larger scale and you're saying, what's the pattern I see? Now that was in a particular leadership role that I was doing some coaching stuff with. But you guys are in very different situations. And so I'm wondering, is there anybody who has an example of a situation where they've had to deal with multiple issues over a period of time that were all connected? Can you guys think of anything? It's hard for me to judge sometimes what somebody else's industry might be experiencing. And maybe there's not, and that's okay. Does the concept make sense? Okay, so what I want you to do is just be aware that when you're sitting down to look at something, you want to sort of zoom out and look at the bigger picture. You want to be able to see, is there a pattern that's going on here? So it could be a communication issue.
How much of that has to do with fear of conflict? I mean, if you're the person in charge and you're dealing with, let's say, a subordinate, you've got a team of folks or whatever it is, and you kind of want to, you're kind of hoping that they're going to pick up what you're putting down, and without you having to be direct and be, confrontational about it, but they're deliberately kind of, not
skirting around
ownership of the situation and the issues. So, and so therefore, because we don't want the conflict, we just kind of hope that they get the general gist, and maybe down the road they'll change their behavior because of our avoidance, right?
Yeah, for sure. That would be a great example of that happening. And in that situation specifically, that person, it was more, for them specifically, it was more a case of not wanting to feel like blame was ever assigned to them. So she lived in this space basically where everything that could go wrong was somehow her fault because, she was supposed to be a leader. And that's the way she interpreted it, even though that wasn't the case, nor had anybody ever said that to her. But she lived in that space where she did not want to be wrong. She did not want to look like she didn't have it all under control. And so as a result of that, that's where she ended up in that space where somehow we can't actually define what the issue is, because somehow then she would have to acknowledge that she owned it, even if she didn't. So this is where her emotion was overriding. There was no, I mean, you're a leader, you're responsible for the entire team. So yes, but you're not going to get grounded because one of your staff isn't doing what they're supposed to, right? So there's often a fear of consequences. A fear of a conflict is often one as well, for sure. In some cases, though, it's in making a decision about what we do for business. So I'm going to say, Chris, let's try using you for an example. At some point in the past, you've obviously recognized a pattern of behavior to develop a particular tool or something you've chosen to do, whether it's your podcast, because I know you do podcasts. Are you able to look back and think about the industry as a whole or experiences that you've had with each individual business that created a pattern that you now can say, oh yeah, I noticed that and that's why I did this?
No.
Okay, thank you.
For instance, the podcast.
Yep.
I wanted to do a podcast. I don't know why I wanted to do it, but it just felt like I should do it. And now 20 some odd episodes in, the feedback I'm getting is great. Last week I had to host I was the moderator of a webinar that I would never have had the opportunity to moderate. I'm doing another one on Thursday for an industry group that I'm moderating a webinar. I just felt like I needed to do the podcast, and now I'm starting to see some of the fruits of listening to my gut and just doing it, even though I was quite fearful of doing it because I hate rejection. That's one of my personality traits. So sometimes, as much as I'm listening to you, Sherri, I hear you, but sometimes I just listen to my gut and do it just because I don't know why.
Okay, that is absolutely brilliant. I love it. So, so let's put aside the patterns thing for a second and let's talk about that. Because when I said earlier, our emotions exist on this scale of attachment and avoidance, right? And it's interesting because you took a podcast and just literally plunks that right down on that scale. So of course you have this discomfort, right? You have this avoidance behavior that made you not want to do that podcast, but yet your gut was telling you you should. So here's where you really, there's enormous value in trusting your gut instinct. The skill comes in learning how to evaluate what your gut's telling you. And sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong. But usually our gut is telling us that for a reason. So I won't get into the neuroscience explanation about, all the extra neurons in your stomach, your abdomen, which is why we get that gut instinct, but whatever. But the truth is that gut instinct that we talk about is our emotions. It is an emotional reaction we're experiencing that says, I should do this or I should not do that. Yet you were able to push past the discomfort of the rejection piece and still choose to do something because for some reason, something felt like that was the right thing to do. There was a reward there. The reward is attachment. So you obviously saw that. And so I want you to actually take some time when you get a chance in the next 24 hours. I want you to go back and spend some time on that. Because the more that we pay attention to that gut reaction, the more we learn to understand what it's telling us. And we're not just reacting on the emotions, we're adding in all of these other layers that we're talking about today. So even though it wasn't a negative, this was a good thing. This was perfect. That was a perfect example. Okay.
Sorry, Sherri, why did it take me almost 12 months to listen to my gut to do the damn thing?
That's a great question. Why don't you ask yourself that?
So you're saying that your gut says, do this thing. It's important to do it. Fear says, don't do that thing. It takes you a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is, until you finally listen to your gut because the issue never goes away.
And that's where courage comes in, right?
That's right.
Sure. But it's also in recognizing. So now, Chris, you can say, okay, so the next time something comes up and you can say, something's telling me maybe this would be a good idea. The first thing that happens is you're going to get that, yeah, but I don't really want to. And you may not even be conscious of the fact that suddenly your first reaction is, don't want to do that because there's a potential for rejection there. The consciousness to say, okay, hang on, remember back to that podcast thing, and it took me 12 months to figure out that the only reason I didn't do it was my fear of rejection. Is that what the problem is here? Yeah, that's what the problem is here. Okay, so why is my gut telling me this is a good thing? Now you've eliminated that emotional reaction. If there's another one, you're going to have to eliminate that one. And if there's another one, you're going to have to eliminate that one. And when all of those emotional reactions are gone, now you're in a rational space. Now you're in the space where you can set aside those emotions. And the worst part of it is, though, the emotions keep coming back, right? That's the part that's a challenge. We have to continually fight those emotions. So this is why having the solid, rational, unbiased, backed up decision-making is so important in the critical thinking process, because if it's just your gut instinct, you could have just as easily been swayed to stop doing those podcasts when the emotion rose of, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be ignored. What happens if nobody shows up? Oh my God, do I look silly? Look at my hair today. I'm at the, like all of those things. Your hair looks fine, Chris. But all of those things are coming up. Those are the quiet little voices. Actually, they're not that quiet. The little voices in the back of our head, right? So we have to move those out of the way to get to a space where the emotion's not influencing our rational decision making. Because as soon as it does, but don't get me wrong, don't ignore those emotions. Those emotions may have a basis in rationality as well. But you just have to figure out what to do with them. Have you done 6 other podcasts and every single one of them fell flat on their face? And is it simply because, I don't know, maybe you're just, not you, Chris, obviously. Maybe you're just not good at doing podcasts. Maybe there's something you're doing the same through every one of those podcasts. Well, now it's time for a little more critical thinking. Now you need to go through all 6 and say, okay, what are the patterns? Where am I getting my feedback from? What do I need to know to make this next decision? So thank you, Chris, because that was a really good example. So identifying patterns is important, but the other piece of this is identifying paths. So every possible path. What do we typically do? So the gut instinct is always in the conversation. If I said, hey, Ivan, I need a resolution for this particular issue. There's this thing happening on my website and I really want more traffic in this section. And I don't know what to do. What's your answer to me? Give me your first answer. Yeah, you.
If you want more traffic, it's paid advertising.
Okay, all right.
You'll
But
pay
here's the
that.
thing, I actually don't have any money. I don't
Sorry?
have any money. I don't
Oh.
have any money to spend on advertising.
Well, you know, I always say there's two ways to do things. One is people at work or money at work. And if you can't pay people to do the work, then you got to do the work. And so therefore, you have to start writing blogs, doing videos, posting them out there, engaging with people in networking, in groups on Facebook. There's a whole host of things you have to do. You have to think about your strategy. You got to put in the time.
There could also be some other answers though, right? So there could be, depending. So Adam, you might be a great one for this because there's probably a zillion paths to accomplish certain things when you're doing programming.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
There's like
a
million different ways.
Yeah, and so if I said to you, okay, Adam, I need this to happen on my app. I need a button that, you know, as soon as you click it, it does this. I'm going to guess that you have your go-to response. The first one that you know is probably the easiest. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you said, yeah, but I don't want that. Now you have to come up with a whole slew of other ones, right? We need to be our worst case scenario customer to ourselves every single time. We need to force ourselves to look at every possible path before we decide on a path, because sometimes there are a lot of things that happen with how our brain works. Our brain doesn't just work in linear thought processes. Our brain also does this other connecting things that seem like they're unconnected in the background. And so if you just purely use your assumption that everything that I know is what I know and I'm comfortable with this answer, and I want to move ahead with that, and I think I know everything that I need to know before I make this decision, then I've made the decision that seems like it's the right one. Sometimes there is information that we can't possibly know. So we have to look for, yeah, but what ifs? Yeah, but what ifs? So for you, it's probably a lot more logical and linear, just purely because from a programming standpoint. But the opportunity to develop things for many different aspects. So Anthony, how about you? Let's see. So if I said to you, actually, this is really funny because this is a source of entertainment. I've seen this over and over again. You know, you probably have a very specific process from beginning to end when you go into someone's home. Now, I will tell you that most people who've had to clean their own home have a process, right? You dust before you vacuum before you wash the floors, right? You wash the floors and you leave the house and no one's allowed back in. I'm sure that you probably also have a process, right? That's a linear process you follow step by step. But your system is different than that. Does it follow the exact same steps?
Yeah, I pretty much do. It's just different equipment that we're using to do those steps.
Okay. What happens if someone does it in a different order? Is it a problem?
Well, yeah, at this current time, yeah, it is, because I want to come in with a structure and I want all the cleaning technicians to follow that.
Okay, so you want to come in with a structure and you want them to follow that. But if they get the end result that's exactly the same or exactly what you need, is it actually a problem? Who's it a problem for, your customer or you?
Well, no, well, for me, it just depends on their approach. If I felt that they were being like defiant in the way that they were doing it, then I have to analyze that and say, okay, this cleaning guy or this cleaning, I might not be able to take on next cleaning, right? Because I still do their approach of the way that they administer the cleaning is not correct in my eyes. I have to analyze that person and probably not use them again.
So it's important because there's your other pieces. Are they doing it because they're defiant? So is this actually an issue that it's out of order? Is this actually an issue that is about, you know, maybe it's a personality clash. Maybe they're just confused and they forgot the, right? What's the actual issue that's happening here? And if they got to the same result at the end, is it a problem? Probably not, as long as the customer's happy and as long as they're not creating more problems, right? So we have to look at, are there different paths? So I like to use this one actually, and seeing as I'm up in cottage country, it's perfect timing. But if I left and I decided that I was going to take the 407 and then I was going to take the 400 to get to where I am, which we did, onto, you know, the next highway. But my son left at the same time and he took all the back roads the whole way, and he you know, enjoyed the scenic view, but he arrived here and he got here 6 hours later than me. Who was wrong?
Yeah, no one's wrong.
Nobody was wrong.
No one.
My goal was to get here quickly. His goal was to enjoy his drive. So it really isn't just about one person's perspective. What if the people in my car are like, damn, I wish I had gone with him because he took the nice scenic drive, but they were stuck in my car. Sure, they got here earlier. Sure, we probably got to the dog with a drink earlier, but was that the most important thing to them? So we have to be aware that there are always many paths, and those paths all have different impacts. You are passing different trees and birds and lakes and rivers. You're passing different things along each one of those. So you have to really understand that with each path, there are different options, there are different consequences, there are different barriers, but you still need to know that those paths are there, because at some point, the one you chose may not work. The one you chose might actually be okay, but now we have to try this again. Can we try another path? So we just need to understand that there are so many paths, and part of the reason for that is also because it's possible. You ever like search on Google Maps and you get the path to where you're going, and then it gives you the gray line that shows you 3 other routes, and sometimes parts of those routes cross over another. It's possible that this part of the route was faster, had less traffic, no tolls, but this part of the route was better at this time of the day, right? So you have to understand that it's possible to also cross some of those paths over. There's so many things that are possible to happen, but without the awareness of all of the possibilities, you're losing out on the option of choosing. Sometimes choice is all that really matters to people. Sometimes it is the right path. Sometimes it's the fast.
Well, not always, right? So with your driving analogy, it just kind of twigged something. My husband hates taking the highways, right? He wants to be that 6 hours. And it's just like, can we just get there, right? And I'm the highway, the 401, 407, whatever. But there are times, because the end goal is just to get where we're going. There are times that I have to let go of let's just get there, because he is really looking forward to the drive. And I don't really give 2 hoots, right? And it's just an inconvenience to me. So
yeah,
why would I rock the boat? Let him drive whatever way he wants. I'm not going to be that backside driver like I usually live.
And what's more important, right? Is enjoying the drive together because you're stuck together for those 3 hours more important, or is, you know, him having that 2 hours of enjoyment extra than you would have more important than I'm there now, right? We have to, and I mean, that's, you know, probably an extreme explanation of that, but we have to be able to weigh those options. And unless we know what the options are, we can't weigh the importance of them unless we know.
I come across this all the time with instruction, right? As with trainers. And so we all have our own personality, and it's not the way I would present it, right? But okay, are the people getting it? Or, you know, if they're asking too many questions, then okay, you got to change. But if they all get it and I'm bored silly, well, I just don't have that personality. It works with that person. And I have worked with other instructors. It's like, oh my God, the paint is drying. But their interaction, people come up and they're conversing with them, and it's like, and that's exactly what you want. So who am I, right? It's just like they're effective.
We're all wired differently. So our perception is going to be different, right? There are people who are much more visual than they are hands-on, and vice versa. There are people who can interpret information very well by hearing. But if you are talking face-to-face with them, they'll lose that. I just hosted a webinar last week with a lady who is autistic, and she is a relatively renowned speaker and consultant in North America. And, she's talking about how if I gave her instructions for something, if I said, okay, you know what, Kelly, I really need you to do this, 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 and this. Let me know when you're done and come back to me. And she said, you know what, if you told me that, but didn't give me that in written form and I walked away, I can guarantee you I have no idea what you said 30 seconds from now. But she has a photogenic memory to the point where her story about that was in high school, she didn't study. She would read the textbook from beginning to end, and when she went to write a test, she would sit down and she would look at the question and remember where in the textbook was that, and she would flip in her mind to that page. My brain doesn't work like that. I couldn't possibly do that. We have to be conscious that everything we do impacts people around us, and so we also need to know that the human element is never something we can assume we know. Mm-hmm. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about, and thank you for sharing that, Catherine, because that was perfect. That was a great way of giving that description. So the next thing is what we call synthesizing. Synthesizing is really about taking information and reworking it into a way that is easier to understand. So Adam, I'm going to use you again for this example purely because if you handed me a document that was full of coding, I would look at that and be like, I have no idea what any of this is, other than the fact that I get the concept that it's coding for a computer, I think.
Yeah.
Your ability then to say to me, oh, it does this. See this line here, it does this. And this section here, it's supposed to do this. Oh, and this at the bottom, this changes the colors, and this is how you change the font. The ability to take that information and turn it into something that is simpler, it's understandable, it's more specific, and I can relate to it, that's called synthesizing.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that.
It's a very helpful skill set to have, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can take this enormous problem, let's say that I'm trying to make a decision about my business, and let's just say that we're considering a massive change in the structure of an organization. And so we need to sit down and start with, okay, so what are the problems we need to solve? And so this is an example because you can go from the smallest thing to the biggest thing. What are the problems we need to solve? Well, I would guess that if I sat down in a room full of executives that run this organization, I said, okay, tell me what's going on. And they would just fill my hours with information. My skill set has to be that I can listen to what's happening and go, okay, so what you're telling me is this, and put it into one line. When they're like, yeah, that. Okay, so I could have stopped that 45-minute ramble. That's being able to synthesize. It's taking the information and really boiling it down to its core elements and recognizing what's most important out of that. Which brings you to the next thing, which is actually filtering concepts versus noise. Those key concepts are really understanding what matters in the moment in each situation. So for example, Sita, for you, you might find that key concepts are things like, color, functionality of space, and style, but those may not be in that particular order. And then, somebody might say, for example, this is a good example because this is me. I will pick out lots of things that I like, but there's no theme necessarily. So I put them all in the room and they kind of look a little weird. And then, you know, over the next month, I need to move things, rearrange, move things through my house. I need to kind of do them all over the place again because it didn't quite fit. The key concept was I really wanted a color theme in that room. And I like that object, but that object doesn't actually fit. Okay, you know what? I still like that object, but it can fit somewhere else in my house. I really wanted to have this, you know, sort of farmhouse style. That's my style. And so the items that I bring in are going to feed into that. And then every once in a while, something comes in that maybe didn't look like it fit, but you know what? Actually, it kind of does fit. And I need to understand where it fits and where it doesn't fit. So knowing the difference between key concepts that are absolute must-haves and other stuff that's just noise, right? Other things that really are just noise. So I'll give you an example actually with, Anthony, you'll love this. This is this great city stuff. So Anthony and I had a conversation the other day and we were talking about, you know, what he enjoys about our calls. And we talked about the fact that we love all the camaraderie. And when we started out, Ivan, when we first started, it was really just us talking about random stuff all over the place. There was not really a lot of rhyme or reason. But over the course of time, we've started to develop a better understanding of what people are finding interesting. Our goal, the key concepts were what keeps bringing people back. Why do people keep joining the conversation? And eventually we start to recognize, of course, there is a certain amount of that camaraderie that's important. We love having that time to have those conversations. But we also recognize that some people's time is very valuable. And so there's only this much of it. And we need to figure out ways to make sure that we're fitting both of those. I could have said my one and only key concept is just camaraderie. And how many people might we have lost? How many people would say, you know what, I'm not learning anything. And they're just talking about random political stuff. This is a waste of my time. And that's, excuse me, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Recognizing which parts are noise, which parts are key concepts. You have to keep the key concepts, get rid of the noise. The other one that I want you guys, this is so important because this really, really drives all the rest. Curiosity. So Sita, when you said earlier about, you know, that it's hard to maintain that, you know, how do you not react right away to an emotional moment? And what I teach everybody is that key is curiosity. Before you react, get curious.
Yeah, like
before you choose.
Give yourself a moment, right? It just pause and yeah.
So think about a moment when somebody has said something to you that you're like, ah! And then stop for a second. Get curious. What might you need to know? Okay, why did they just do that? Not, I'm looking for a reason to crucify them. Why did they do that? What was actually going on in their mind at that particular moment? You know, perfect example is, my cousin posted this thing the other day about driving, and one minute is, oh, why can't we all just love each other? And the next minute is, you jerk, why'd you just cut me off? And I'm like, okay, how many people do that? Yeah, it's all love and kumbaya until somebody cuts you off, and then
or they go behind the wheel.
We know, road rage seems to also bring up really good conversations. But so we think about that and think, okay, so put yourself in that situation. Maybe, have you ever been in that situation where you've accidentally cut somebody off and then you're like, oh God, sorry. And then you realize that it was really just because you were thinking about 6 other things. You were worrying about your grandma, you were worried about the kids, you were thinking about work, and you were totally not paying attention. Was it intentional? Well, probably not. I mean, occasionally, yes, that's not true. We do cut people off intentionally. I don't, that's far too dangerous, but I've seen it happen. Is it intentional? Likely not. Is it unintentional? Is it also just they're distracted? Is it that they made a choice that was the wrong choice and they realized it at the last possible second that was the wrong choice? It's more likely that those people just made a mistake or were distracted than the fact that they're actually the jerk names that you just called them, right? Get curious. How do you know that that person didn't just find out some horrific news and they're bawling behind the wheel as they're driving wherever they're going? I mean, you don't. You probably see them if you see them, but you don't know that. You don't know that something really terrible didn't happen. You don't know that 30 seconds ago, somebody else cut them off, totally freaked them out. Now they're like white knuckling driving. And that's not to say that you should give everybody an excuse. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm saying is get curious about what created the situation you're in right now in this moment that is causing the concern, and look at all the paths. If you can, look at the patterns. If you can, try and synthesize this down. Remember that you need to look at the barriers. Is this an emotional issue? Is this an assumption? Well, your assumption that maybe they should have stopped before they went through that intersection was probably right. However, you need to make sure that you've considered the barriers, that you've considered all of the possibilities, you've considered the patterns. Is this a stop sign? Have you ever experienced this? There's always those stop signs that you feel like, for some strange reason, I know that they have to stop and I have to, it's a four-way stop, but I'm always anxious that someone's going to drive right through that stop sign. Have you ever been to one, like an intersection where you're like, this just feels like something could happen here? I swear there's been a few times that I'm driving along and I'm like, yeah, I know that I have the right of way, but for some strange reason, see, trust your gut instinct, Chris. Probably because 30 seconds later, some idiot blew through that intersection and you'll never know. But the idea is that you need to be aware of all of that stuff before you make your decision. And it's not different whether it's one moment of road rage or whether it's massive decisions about your business. So can you guys think about a situation where a little bit of curiosity that may have caused you to ask more questions might have changed the outcome of a decision that you've made? Think about something that you've done in your business in the last, whatever, month, week, year, whatever. Something that you've had to make a decision about. And it could be that you made the right decision in the moment, that's fine. But you had to make a decision about it. And I know you've had them. Sometimes it takes a moment to trigger those thoughts. Maybe it's how you choose to respond to a particular client. They ask for some information, you send them the information. It could be where you advertised. You know, I just made a decision. I was going to go out and I was going to try this, right? Chris, you made a decision that you were going to start a podcast and look where it went to. What I want you to think about is there a particular moment where you could analyze your critical thinking skills and maybe applied them different? Doesn't matter what the outcome was, good, bad, or ugly, because that's not the point. Just could you have applied them differently, or did you apply them really, really well? Sorry, Catherine, I think you were about to say something.
Well, you were saying about the client piece. So this actually goes way back to earlier in my career as a private HR, but it's one of those things, like you just said, you have to get all of the information and don't just blindly trust that the person you're speaking to is giving you all of that information. I was brought into an organization to deal with what they considered to be a disgruntled employee who was creating some problems, et cetera, et cetera. Basically they were at the point where they were ready to terminate this person's employment. And I had blindly just said, okay, I took their word for what was going on, put together a termination letter. I went in to help them do the termination. During the meeting that I had with the employer before we met with the employee, they said something that had me go, oh, wait a minute, I wasn't aware of that. Let me back you up there a minute, right? So then we got talking a little bit more about some of the behavior that they were observing with this person, and I started getting the impression that what they were seeing was what I call reactionary behavior. Okay, they were taking the position this person was being deliberate in their actions, and I'm taking the position that I think they're rebelling against something. There's something else going on. So I said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable proceeding with this termination right now. I said, I think we need to look at this situation a little more in depth. We did still bring the employee in because there was already a meeting scheduled. And I just said, let me have a meeting with this person and see what's going on. Well, it turns out that there was a toxic person in that department that wasn't being dealt with. And I was right, it was reactionary behavior that they were seeing. This person had put up with it for so long and had asked for assistance, was not getting the assistance, that they were actually starting to demonstrate negative behaviors in the workplace that were affecting their coworkers. So, had I not triggered, that conversation, and had that, you know, if I had just gone in and said, yep, let's meet with the employee and let them go, they probably would have come back and sued, and there would have been a huge wrongful dismissal case, and the employee would have been right. But because I had the meeting with the employer to begin with and said, you know, there's let's just delve down a little bit more into what I'm hearing in this, you know, we found out that there was actually a different route to this problem. So.
That's awesome. Okay, perfect example. Perfect example. And you're right, as far as it goes with a lot of people situations, that's probably one of the keys, is we need to uncover more information. We need to be detectives in every situation. We need to look for, what do I not know? This is one of my favorite questions, but this is a me thing. What do I not know? Because before I embark on something, I have to ask a lot of questions. I need to understand, because I want to know what I don't know. I want to be able to take into consideration all of the possible outcomes. And so I will ask all of the extra questions. I will want to know what the worst possible fallout is, even if I'm not asking that person, you know, so what's the worst thing that could happen? I'm taking that information and doing my own synthesis, right? I'm synthesizing that information to say, okay, so I can see that even though this person may not recognize that the outcome of this situation is this, I know that this is a possibility. We can sometimes use scales, we can sometimes use charts, I mean, you can, but I really highly suggest that you take those 5 particular targets and actually use them in going through decision making. And even if it's an after the fact, over the next little bit, take a decision that you've made about anything. It really doesn't matter how big or small it is. Take those 5 pieces and actually just write some notes to yourself about how you addressed that. So did you see all of the possible paths? What were the other options? What were the other choices or decisions you could have made? And because you want to see them through, you want to know what the outcome could be. Could the outcome still be the same thing? If they all get you to the same place, well, then now you get to choose based on other factors. So as many paths as possible. Identify the patterns. Now, so Catherine, in your example, you may not have known ahead of time that pattern, but my guess is that in the future, every customer or client that you encountered where you might have had a similar situation, I would bet that you went looking for those patterns before you got to that termination stage.
Yes, absolutely.
So you learned. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. So the synthesizing, you know, this can be a practiced thing. We all communicate very differently. And so some people communicate in, you know, a lot of explanations. I love this. Ivan never answers a question with yes or no. Anybody ever notice that?
Me?
Wow.
So Ivan gives a lot of his thoughts behind something, right? I mean, Ivan never does anything without thought, but there's a lot of thought to something. And then, you know, earlier I asked Chris a question, I got like, nope. Not that I think you don't put a lot of thought into stuff, Chris, but everybody has different communication styles, right? And so you will recognize that some people will put so much information out there. It's really good to practice, especially the more you communicate, the narrowing things down. So you can go on the internet and you can find whatever short story about anything. Actually, employee situations are really good examples to use, but and it doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. The point is practicing the skill. It's, you know, shrinking down to get to a handful of key points. Take anything at all, could be a news article, whatever. Read it and then shrink it down to no more than, you know, 3 key points. If there is 10 paragraphs, 3 max. If there's, you know, 25 or 30 paragraphs, maybe give yourself 4 or 5. Just practice that skill and it will actually help you to learn how to hone that down. I think actually, ironically enough, one of the things that made me more conscious of that in my writing not in verbalization, was having to learn how to write essays that were very short and had to have a lot of evidence included. In school, it's write a 2,500 word essay on how you talk about this neuroscience thing and use evidence. And let me tell you, I would start off with 10,000 word essays and have to shrink them down to 2,500. It's a skill. So practice it. It gives you an opportunity to really understand how to eliminate all of the excess noise and identify the key concepts, okay? So synthesize, and then you also need to do that. Your key concepts, get rid of the noise. And the other piece is the curiosity, right? So start asking questions. Write your questions down. Again, whatever the situation is you're using as your example, get curious. What other things could I have asked about? Maybe you don't care, and that's okay. But what else could you have asked questions about? Why did he choose to do that? What happened that day in his life? What was his previous experience that might have led him to think that way? What kind of a situation led to this problem? Has this ever happened before? Has anybody else had to deal with this situation? How did they do it? So you want to ask as many questions as you can, and that curiosity, that little, wide-eyed child, all the why questions, why, get there, go back to 3. Ivan, sit on the floor eye to eye with Tanis and start thinking, okay, so she had to ask me these questions. What would she ask? So, sometimes we need time to get into a headspace. I will tell you, a number of years ago, I did a keynote speaking engagement with the Hamilton Police Service and one of the public schools, one of the how would they term this? One of the more challenged public schools in the Hamilton School Board. And this was a Leadership for Girls Day, and it was anti-bullying, and they wanted me to speak to these kids. And I was like, okay, first of all, it's been a long time since I was a kid, but I never had girls. And this was a conference full of all the girls in the preteen years. And I was like, I don't even know how to talk. No, I have boys. I have no idea how to talk to girls. And so you know what I did? This is kind of funny. I started watching tween shows. I kid you not, for 2 days, I watched, now I can't remember what the shows are. There's one where they were these 2 girls that got switched at birth, and they grew up in the wrong family. And that might have been what it was called, switched at birth or something. I don't know. What's that? What's it called? Switched at birth, that's what it's called. My stepdaughter's downstairs. I kid you not, I watched that show for like 2 days straight, trying to get inside the head of these girls, which may have actually been the right ones or the wrong ones, I don't know. But you've really got to figure out how to get into that space to be able to ask those kinds of questions.
Sherri,
okay.
I was just going to make a comment though. You have to learn how to ask questions too, because when you're actually outside yourself asking the questions, just like Catherine was talking about, right? You could ask a question and you've just opened Pandora's box. So for my medical background, I'm very used to having to do that medical report when you bring somebody in. Here's the details. If they want to know why did this happen, then they'll ask you, but you're just giving them the basics. But when I would show up as a new medic and I'd say, so why'd you call today? What's going on? And well, it would start back in 1962, and it's, you had to learn how to ask the question, why did you call 911 today? Right? Yeah. And then you could disseminate and then you could take over the conversation. And I'm sure Catherine is used to that as well, being HR, is that you've got to grab the information, stop them when the noise is coming, and so that you can get your information. Then you can let them chitter chatter on the side after, but you've got to get that main concept.
That's a really key point, because in this situation, we kind of want to know about what we might think is noise at first. because what we might think is noise right now might actually be really valid. So, you know, they might start off telling you, I mean, this is probably not as difficult to kind of wrap your head around, but, you know, there's a lot of people who are dealing with stress and anxiety and emotional challenges and depression and all of those sorts of things. So what initially they might start telling you a story that might seem like it's completely unrelated, but the reality is it's the lead up to like a complete meltdown. You probably needed to know, have some understanding of that. And it could very well be that the lead up to the meltdown was the person in the next room. And if you're the paramedic that got called, you need to know that that person's in the next room creating more stress, right? So just be aware that you want to take all that information in and then synthesize. Again, that curiosity is really, really key. So taking all of it in and knowing that some of it may need to be removed later, but first, you're checking for patterns. Don't remove it until you've had time to check for patterns. Is this a path? Does it connect somewhere else? Now start thinking, does this match up to the key concepts? Because if there's a pattern of that showing up again and again, there's a good chance that it's a key concept that you need to keep it in mind, right? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a couple of steps. I just want to kind of go through this. And so those 5 skill sets you really want to work on, I'm going to give you 5 stages. Okay, so the concepts or the skills are things you can work on learning how to do. And that's something that we could absolutely, you know, probably do in a larger scale format at some point in the future. But for now, that's little things that you can work on. The steps or stages to go through critical thinking process so that you know before you make a decision if you're on the right path or that you've considered everything, that you've included all your skill sets, is to start off with your clear, simple problem statements. What are the problems I need to resolve that I'm making this decision about? Really simple, really clear. Make sure you don't have an excessive number of them, because if you do, you probably need to boil that down to 1 or 2, or you need to split it up into multiple decisions. The next step is to clarify all of your options. So if you've done a good job of considering all of the paths and you've recognized which ones have a detrimental outcome, you've eliminated those ones, you're probably left with, you know, a smaller number of options. What are your options? The next one is to clarify all of the facts. Again, eliminate your assumptions, right? We don't want assumptions influencing. We also don't want perceptions influencing. Clarify facts, only facts. Can I prove this? Is there something I can use to back this up? My assumptions about it may be wrong. My beliefs, my perception, my emotional reaction to it, they could all be wrong. You want facts. Now work them through. You kind of want to do the a video game in your head, right? Maybe this is a bad one to use, but you know, the video game where, okay, so if I use this choice, if this is my option, let's play the game. Let's, you know, start off. I've got all my lives and I'm going to go through this forest and, you know, how many creatures could potentially attack me? And oh my God, now I'm out of lives. Was there somewhere I could have actually regenerated? Okay, got to go back and do it again. You need to play each one of those options through to the best of your ability, because you cannot control everything. You can't assume everything, but you want to play each one of those through to the best of your ability, because it gives you an opportunity to look for barriers along the way. It gives you an opportunity to look for information that maybe you didn't realize you needed to know. It gives you an opportunity to look for other resources you need to bring in. Why are you laughing, Ivan? He's got something in his head. He's like, yeah. Give us the example. What's that?
It would just go on for too long.
Okay. I'm looking at the time. Otherwise, I totally would have called you out on that. Okay. So working them through, you're not always guaranteed that you're going to get the perfect answer. And eventually, you're going to have to make a decision about what you want to do. But the critical thinking is this. You're going to have to come to a decision. Sometimes that decision is, are you leaving us, Sita? Sometimes that decision is, you know, not one that you're thrilled with, but ultimately you know that it's logical, it's unbiased, it's rational. And so sometimes all we can do is actually try them out and see how it goes. Okay. So those are the steps, those 4 steps. Once you've mastered the skills or even just applied those skills that we've talked about, it's easier to work your way through these steps and get to that end result. Is it guaranteed that you're still going to get the right one? No, even Elon Musk makes mistakes. Actually, the guy does some kind of crazy things sometimes. But I don't know what his daughter's name is. I'm sure he did not use critical thinking skills, by the way, in naming her. So you also need to know, though, that after the critical thinking skills, after you've implemented those, the idea of also having an evaluation process is really valuable. And we can certainly talk about that again at another time as well. But I think that one of the parts that works the best is if you've got your critical thinking skills, you can probably reapply those to whatever outcome you have and see where maybe it might have worked slightly differently. We've all had those situations where we've been like, yeah, if I was going to do that again, I would probably
do it differently.
Right? Yeah, yeah. And would we have changed the entire path? Not necessarily. We may have changed one little decision on that path. We may have changed one, route, or we may have just taken a slight detour. Maybe we would have made a stop at the rest stop along the way, right? There are a lot of things that we can look back, but we know very well, we've all said that, yeah, if I was going to do that again, I would definitely try this. And hopefully we have the opportunity to be able to try those things out again. Okay, so I'm just going to go around really quickly. I want to know from each person one of the key concepts that you guys are taking away from all of this today. So we're going to start with Catherine Davies.
Listen to the noise first before I make a decision.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
I like it. Adam, what about you?
I think probably just don't jump to conclusions. Be a bit more attentive when it comes to stuff like this. Sometimes the solution in your head is not the solution that people need. It's the solution that they want.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay. Maggie. Everybody's getting good at realizing when they're on mute.
Well, with my traffic noise back here. So, yeah, I guess for me, again, don't assume things, but also, well, I've always believed in the listening to my gut or trusting my instincts, but at the same time, sometimes the emotional can get in the way of things, and sometimes you got to get a really kind of be more logical and not always rely on the emotion.
Very good. Very good. Catherine Kissinger.
For me, it's going down that path a little further just to make sure that I'm not, like you were saying earlier about how when you Google map something and you get the most direct route, but there's 3 other routes and sometimes they will cross. I have to remember that to keep going to get back to that point where they might actually meet up, because sometimes I just go off on a tangent and I just keep going.
You've been talking to Ivan lately?
No, she took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say the same thing. Thanks.
All right, Ivan.
Just what? I think that's basically it. Beautifully said. Yeah, but because there are so many paths to get there, right? That sometimes I jump paths. So
Never noticed that.
Yeah, but it's quite the journey.
Yeah, but I want you to remember though that sometimes those jumping paths are also an advantage. The ability to paths is important. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It again comes back to that awareness, right? You have the awareness that there are other paths there. And when you recognize something's not working, jumping a path, being able to pivot in the moment is really also very, very important.
Because for me, I hate to say it's a psychological game I play, but it's in, just by jumping path, it's the same path, you're heading to the same direction, right? But by jumping strategies to get there midstream, just kind of keeps things fresh so that I'm constantly exciting myself, because I'm trying this new thing, right? It's the same thing, it's just different.
Okay, awesome. Chris, your turn.
Well, during most of this, I was thinking about how to apply critical thinking, and now I'm thinking, when you referred to Elon Musk,
Mhm.
I'm thinking of the situations where not to apply critical thinking, because not everything needs to be critically thought out. Some things we can do it just for fun. Like naming, I mean, I disagree with naming a child just for fun, but you know what I mean?
My
Like,
kid's Stardust.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. But I think you make a really good point, Chris. I mean, you know, the idea is that we're using these concepts in business, but even in business, sometimes we make a choice because it's fun, because Ivan likes the excitement of it. Because you know what, I want to do something that really also inspires me in my business, not just actually to accomplish the business, right? So that is a really good point. There are definitely times not to apply that.
Did anybody hear the
All right.
story of Elon Musk when he went to Moscow? Anybody heard that story?
I don't
Okay, I'm just gonna
know.
tell it to you really quick. I probably Adam knows the story, but here's the quick, the Cole's notes on it. So he goes to Moscow because he wants to buy an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, to change out to become the vehicle that's going to take him to Mars, right? So he goes there, and of course, because Moscow, as you know, they were one of the launch sites to take things to the space station. So if you had a payload that needed to go into space, there were only a few places that were still going into space. So anyway, so he goes there and says, listen, I want to buy one of your missiles. And of course, they chuckle with him and they say, you know, basically buzz off. We're not going to give you little man. So he gets, you know, I mean, he never ever changed his view on the destination, right? He gets on his plane, and on the way home, he writes the business plan for SpaceX. As the story goes, now, just recently, now these companies are now lining up to take their payloads to space through SpaceX rockets, taking away business from that very same company that told them to buzz off years ago. So that is grit and brawn, and dare I say, I love that man. There you go. I've said it. Elon.
Great story. I did not know that actually. That is fantastic. And you know what? That ultimately is really about not changing the goal. It's changing how you get to the goal when you realize what you're doing is not working. So that's the ultimate story of it. Very good. Anthony, how about you? What are you taking away from today? Are you there still? He may not be. I know his is a little one, so maybe not. Okay, Teresa, what about you? Are you able to jump in?
Yeah, so actually, I thought it was a very interesting call today. So thank you, Sherri. But for me, I think there's a few things which fit into different aspects of my life. So definitely not assuming and coming to conclusions, which sometimes I tend to do, and then I think of the worst. So eliminating that part, and then just being aware of my reactions, because sometimes when I do assume, that I have an immediate reaction thinking, okay, well, that must be it. And so this is the reaction that it should follow up, which, because I'm assuming, I don't actually know, which leads me to the last one where I need to ask just a few more questions and just step back and go, hey, okay, wait, what did you mean by that? And can you just explain to me what you're talking about? Because what I'm thinking, what you're talking about, obviously could be completely different right now. So, you know, and then usually they are completely different. I'm like, oh, well, I was way off. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, you know what? I almost tried to, you know, reprimand you or give you, grief about this or that. And wow, I'm so glad we avoided that. So,
me too.
Yeah.
Just saying.
That's right. That's right.
Critical thinking. That space between thought and action.
So glad we stopped at that gas station.
Praise the Lord. I'm just saying.
Yeah, so that was good.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to is really everything eventually boils down to our emotional intelligence, which is many different things, and how we use it. And so this allows us to have some understanding of how to build in a few of those seconds of, what do I do with those seconds? First of all, awareness when we need to catch ourselves, that's a whole month-long workshop. But knowing what to do when you can recognize, okay, I need to just take a step back here for a second because my first reaction is this, or because I think that this is the right answer, or my immediate response is that because I already know I've already tried this path and it didn't work. So it really does give you an advantage because you have some concrete steps that you can implement in those moments, not just when you're decision making big decisions like how do we restructure the organization, to maybe naming your child or deciding to stop at the gas station, whatever that may be. Okay, so we got 2 minutes to wrap up, and so I just really quickly want to say thank you guys very much. The engagement is always really helpful because it helps drive home for everybody when we're able to hear stories that apply to someone different or how someone else interprets something. Helps to fuel that curiosity. That's really weird. I didn't think of that. And how often we need to hear other people's experiences and interpretations of things to help us really internalize information even more effectively. So I want to say thanks for all of that, and thank you for joining me on my vacation this week. And next week will not be here because next week is the civic long weekend, and I'm not working then. So well, so not working.
I am.
But the following week. Yeah, but yours is kind of fun, so that doesn't really count.
Yeah.
The following week, we're actually going to be talking a little bit about strategic partnerships and how to develop those. And when we talk about strategic partnerships, that does not mean that you're, signing off legal documents and marrying companies. Strategic partnerships can really be a huge gamut of different ways of working with other businesses and other people. So I just want to help you guys create a little bit of a framework and look for opportunities to do that will help push your business forward. And of course, don't miss Tech Talk on Thursday with Catherine at 8:30, because I will tell you that the schedulers are a really fantastic tool. So she's probably got some amazing insights. And of course, don't miss the Wednesday night jam session with Melissa and Stephen, right? Okay, good.
You got vacation brain.
What's that?
You have vacation brain.
Yeah.
Listen, down to like the deck or something. I don't know. Maybe breakfast, actually. I hear someone in the kitchen. So you guys have an amazing week. And as always, I absolutely welcome lots of feedback. So please don't hesitate, whether it's just popping off a quick email to let me know what your thoughts are, or if you have some areas that you guys want to explore. I would love to do that. Make sure you guys are all connecting with each other. Don't forget that, right? Social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Make sure you guys are all connecting. Let each other know what platforms you're on, and like we talked about last week, make sure that you're repost stuff that other people have posted. Maybe I can't make a referral to you, but I can certainly repost some of your stuff if I see you putting neat stuff out there.
Yeah, and listen, I want to also say thank you to the folks. I've gotten a few folks on Google going ahead and giving us a good rating. So please do that for others as well. Do that for Catherine. Do that for Sherri. Do that for Chris. Please give each other good references. And Adam, Maggie too, everybody. Okay.
Awesome.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Have an awesome day. Take care. Cheers.
Week. See you guys soon.
Bye.
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 Hi.